In this lesson, we'll try to understand the origin of instincts. Instincts are those behaviors that are not learned, but are performed automatically by an animal under the right circumstances. So instincts are generally adaptive behaviors, and they're not learned, and they raise a puzzle. How did animals come to have instincts? So we'll try to lay out a general explanation for the origin of instincts. The example we're going to use is the cuckoo bird. Now, there are many species of cuckoo birds, but some of them live an interesting lifestyle. They live as parasites. Now, what does it mean for a bird to be a parasite? Well, first, let's take a look at the victim of the cuckoo. Here we see a reed warbler, and like most bird species, reed warblers, they mate, so males and females get together and they mate, and then like good parents, right, they set up a nest, and the female lays some eggs, and then the eggs will hatch out into chicks, and the mother and father are dutiful parents, and they go get food and bring food, and they raise their chicks. So this is the typical sort of lifestyle of most bird species. Well, the cuckoo is a parasitic bird, and the cuckoo is going to victimize the warbler. Here's what the cuckoo does. Here we see the cuckoo. Here's the reed warbler nest. Soon after the warblers have laid their eggs, and while the warbler parents are away feeding, the female cuckoo bird is going to deposit one of her eggs into the nest. Now, the female has been waiting for this opportunity. She has already mated with a male, and so she has fertilized eggs, and she has an egg ready to be deposited into the nest of a totally different species, the warblers. Now, she's not going to just lay the egg here. She's also going to steal one of these eggs. She's going to eat one of the eggs. So I'm going to just put the cuckoo egg there. So there's the cuckoo egg, and now there are 3 remaining warbler eggs. And she does this, presumably, to not raise suspicion. So it's the same number of eggs in the nest as the original 4 warbler eggs. The cuckoo mother then just leaves, and now it's up to the warbler parents to raise the cuckoo chick. So this is the nature of the parasitism. So the cuckoo is a parasite because the cuckoos are getting other birds to raise their children, raise their chicks. But it's what happens next that is just an amazing example of an instinctual behavior. So here we see the cuckoo chick, and as it turns out, just a fact about the cuckoo developmental biology, the cuckoo chick will hatch first before the other warbler chicks. And when it hatches first, it does an instinctual behavior that we might consider to be somewhat cruel. What it's going to do is position itself to get a warbler egg on its back, and then it's going to lift itself and launch that warbler egg out of the nest, and that will destroy the egg. It will continue this behavior until all of the warbler eggs are out of the nest. So the cuckoo chick's instinctual behavior here, recall that nobody taught this chick how to do this, right? This is a behavior that did not have to be learned. It is wired into the brain of the cuckoo chick, and it's clearly adaptive. By eliminating the warbler eggs, by getting rid of them, the cuckoo chick is removing extra mouths that would have to be fed. And you can see why this is especially important in the next picture here, because the cuckoo bird is much larger than the warbler. So this is the cuckoo chick as it has grown up. It's huge, right? And it needs as much food as 4 warbler chicks. So it is in the interest of the cuckoo chick to get rid of the warbler eggs so as to hog all the food from the warbler parents. Now, there are lots of questions that are raised by this picture here, right? So why do the parents feed the cuckoo chick? It looks so different, and we'll investigate those in class. But for now, we're going to try to understand how did the cuckoo chick come to have this behavior, this egg ejecting behavior. So we're going to call that an instinct. And the question is, how did it get its instinctual behavior? Now, the answer to that question involves a lot of biology that we see in this diagram here. And it will involve the concept of natural selection, introduced by Charles Darwin in the 1800s to help us understand how species become well adapted to their environments. So here we go. Again, our task is to understand how an instinct can arise in a species. So let's start with some cuckoo parents up here. Now we have the male and the female, and the male will produce a sex cell called a sperm cell, and the female will produce an egg, and the sperm cell will fertilize the egg, and so we'll have a fertilized egg. In the nucleus of the cell resides a very important molecule called DNA, and we will be learning that DNA carries the information to make a living organism, in this case a cuckoo. Specifically, DNA has the recipes to make proteins, and proteins are the working molecules inside cells. But it's enough to know for us now that DNA just carries the information for how to construct an organism. So the fertilized egg is going to go through development. One cell will become two cells, 4 cells. And the cells will be communicating and sending chemical signals to each other. The cells will be specializing. Some cells will become blood cells. Some cells become muscle cells. Others liver cells. And some will become brain cells. And those brain cells are electrically excitable cells. They carry information. They signal other brain cells. And they wire up in a certain pattern, and the wiring pattern of brain cells determines what kinds of behaviors the animal will produce. So here we see the brain of this cuckoo chick will generate a certain behavior. Now, let's imagine we're starting from a point of view where no cuckoo chicks have the egg ejecting behavior. We're trying to understand the origin of egg ejection. Well, as it happens, whenever animals reproduce, there's lots of variation in their offspring because there's lots of different combinations of DNA in the fertilized egg, and there's also new mutations that get produced. And again, we'll study these things later in the course. So we just have to accept it for now that there are lots of different brains that get built during development. And here we're going to see two versions of behavior that are produced by two kinds of brains, ultimately produced by the developmental process under the guidance of DNA. So let's take a look at these two kinds of behaviors. Let's imagine one cuckoo chick just hatches out of its egg and does nothing with the warbler eggs, so no egg ejection. Now that's presumably how this sort of behavior would have started. The chicks would not have had the instinct, right? So this is just like a normal chick. It's just going to wait there for the parents to feed it, and then it will have competing mouths here. The warbler chicks will hatch out as well, and so there'll be competition for food. But let's imagine, because of some little difference in DNA, which influenced the way the brain got wired up, some cuckoo chicks in another nest somewhere, some cuckoo chick just had the slightest little tendency to just sort of back up and knock maybe one egg out of the nest. Now here's the idea. We're going to call that sort of variation in a behavior, but if there's any difference in survival due to this variation in the behavior, then we get conditions where natural selection will apply. And so Darwin's going to argue that this variation in behavior, this ejection behavior, even if it's just one egg, it may lead to more food for this cuckoo chick. And with more food, this cuckoo chick has a survival advantage. And we're going to represent that survival advantage by showing that this cuckoo chick gets to become a parent. Right, it passes through sort of the filter of natural selection while this cuckoo chick goes splat. So the idea is that in general, if you look at just large numbers of cases like this, chicks that tend to knock out one egg will tend to have a better chance of survival. They'll get more food, and they will be more likely to be parents. And so we're going to represent that as saying this variation in behavior has the survival advantage. Now, what happens then when these chicks grow up and they get to reproduce? Well, they're going to pass on whatever DNA, whatever genetic material produced that slight difference in brain wiring that generated the behavior. You see, so now that the chick that survived a little bit better than the other one over here, that chick is going to be the parent, and then we can keep on going around and around and around. And we have to know that each generation there are new kinds of mutations and there's new variation in the genetic material. So some of the cuckoo brains that are being produced in the next generation, maybe they will eject 2 eggs instead of 1, right? And you can imagine, though, that as you go round and round and round like this, natural selection will favor whatever changes in the brain that produce egg ejection that ejects all the eggs. because if you eject all the eggs, then you're going to have more food from the warbler parents. But every generation, natural selection is at work here. And Darwin's going to say every generation there must be variation, and there must be some survival difference as a result of that variation. In this case, the variation is in behavior, but that variation is the result of variation in brains, and that variation is the result of variation in the genetic material, DNA. So we go round and around and around. We started with cuckoo chicks that didn't eject eggs at all, and we end up, after generation, with cuckoo chicks that eject all the eggs. And so today, when we see cuckoo chicks ejecting the eggs, and we think, well, how did they get that behavior? What we don't see is the history, the evolutionary history of that instinctual behavior. And the story for all instincts involves this kind of idea that every generation there is variation in genetic material that produces variations in brains, which produces variations in behavior, and selection, natural selection, will be favoring certain behaviors over others. And that behavior can be passed on because that behavior was the product of a brain that was under the influence of DNA. And DNA is the material that gets passed on during reproduction. So we go round and around and around, and it's like installing an instinct into the brain of the cuckoo chick.